Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War, I guess, update extra live chat with Colby Badhwar again. Not for the first time. We've had a conversation here before. I thank him for coming on all the way over from Canada, where it is early morning for him. I believe that's where he's at the moment. Thank you, Colby, for coming to speak to us.
Thanks so much for having me back on, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. So we've got about an hour to talk about quite a few subjects because quite a lot is going on at the moment, not least the US aid bill. Now, what I'm going to do is assume that most people have watched my video where I broke down the aid bill looking at your tweet threads that you had written in some great detail about both this aid bill and previous presidential drawdown authority. Do you want to just give a really quick and dirty synopsis of what's going on with the aid bill and what we would need to be looking out for in going forward in our conversation today?
Sure. So I did write a thread going into fairly great detail on what is actually in that aid bill, where all the money goes to. It's not 100 tweets like my the thread prior to that, which was explaining a lot of nuance about the history of how we got up to this point. So there's 36 tweets on the supplemental appropriations bill that just passed in Congress, explaining what's in the Ukraine-related portion of that package. So the main thing is that people may be seeing the sort of $60 billion or $61 billion top line, and there's a tremendous amount of mis and disinformation around this. And the most important thing for people to understand is that very little of the actual money in this bill goes directly to Ukraine. There's an awful lot of it that goes to things that really aren't related to Ukraine or very tangentially related to Ukraine. So people need to have an appreciation that in terms of the actual money in the bill, not that much goes to Ukraine. And in terms of the actual amount of military assistance that Ukraine could expect to receive through the mechanisms in this bill is also relatively modest. So those are the two most important things that I would highlight. And I don't think we need to get into a line-by-line summary of what's in it beyond there, unless you have some specific questions that you want to flag.
Well, I guess so. The top line idea is that probably about a third of it is going to go in terms of military aid, and even that's like, it depends how you slice and dice that. So you have the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which is what the US can take from its own stocks and take direct or give directly to Ukraine. That's the easiest and best way to expedite aid to Ukraine. Now, there is presently in this bill 7.8 billion of presidential drawdown authority plus 3.9 billion from the previous lot as well, although they've just spent another billion. Is that about right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then there is this 13.78 billion so $13.8 billion worth of stuff that they can order from US defense entities. But does that also mean that they can order that from abroad as well, if needs be?
They can order from non-US entities as well, and that has been done in the past. They have used those Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, or USAI, funds to procure artillery ammunition from Bulgaria and likely other sources as well. But we do know for a fact that Bulgaria is one of them. So that can be done. I would say that the vast majority of the money has gone back into American defense contractors, but the money can be used internationally, which is quite important, because I've argued that one of the first things that should be done is to place orders or place a commitment to the Czech initiative, so that the balance of ammunition that has not yet been funded through the other countries that are participating, that balance can be made up by the United States, and they can get all these orders placed. And we know in the package that was just announced, the Department of Defense announced a $6 billion USAI commitment this or last week, using these new funds, and there's been some confusion around that as well. So there's this 13.78 billion, 6 billion of that has now just been committed for this new package. And some of that money we know is going to around 200,000 152 millimeter shells. Now, obviously, the United States doesn't produce 152. That's a Soviet legacy Soviet caliber. So that's coming from somebody else. Now, whether those shells are coming from, will come from the Czech initiative, or that's something that the United States has negotiated bilaterally with another country that's able to produce that ammunition or has that ammunition in stock, we don't know. But we do know that there is 152 millimeter ammunition that's included in this package. And there's also 155 standard millimeter, standard NATO caliber ammunition. And that may be orders placed to the U.S.'s own domestic manufacturers, or it may be orders from other countries. We don't know, because the packages don't specify with that level of detail where things are going to get procured from.
So you are saying, therefore, it is worth the US spending that money, certainly at the moment, on both the Czech initiative and possibly the Estonian initiative, where they've maybe found another 1.2 million shells or something in that region. Do you think it is more important that artillery ammunition gets expedited than pretty much anything else right now? That's a real easy decision for the US to make?
Yeah, absolutely, because Ukraine doesn't have enough artillery ammunition, and Estonia and Czechia are suggesting that this ammunition is available on relatively short lead times, maybe not quite as fast as some had suggested at the outset. But certainly they're talking about, we can get this ammunition delivered this summer, or starting this summer at least. And the backlog for production from our own factories in the West is quite considerable. So if the United States were to just place orders for Ukraine for its own domestic production, those orders are for future shells. And, that's good, because more orders allows for more scaling. But Ukraine is already probably getting quite a bit of the ammunition that's getting produced on a monthly basis from the United States. So placing more orders for its own factories isn't going to really help Ukraine in the immediate term. But if there's other countries that have shells available already, or that can be produced on a quicker timeline, then certainly that's a prudent use of those funds, in my view.
Yeah, the US defense industry, or certain components of it, have already announced that the USAI money will allow them to beef up their production capacities to the amount of shells that they want per month, which is obviously really good news for both actually Ukraine and the US going forward. So it puts the US in a better position for its own kind of security, if it's got the capacity to make a lot of shells, for whatever eventuality may come about. With regard to the $3.9 billion USAI and $6.6 billion $3.9 billion presidential drawdown authority that's left over, and a $6.6 billion that was left over from the last package of USAI, so what they can contract. We understand that the $1 billion PDA package that is forthcoming from the US is coming from the last lot, and the $6 billion contract equipment is coming from the last bill as well. What I've given my reasons already. I'm interested to see what your reasons are that the US hadn't spent that already. And my guess way to start that conversation is that I don't think people make stupid decisions for the sake of making stupid decisions. So everyone has rationale for what they're doing. Now, we may think it's stupid in hindsight, or we're putting different, garbage in, garbage out. We're putting different variables in our function machine. So what is it that the American administration or the DoD was thinking for not spending that money up front?
Sure. So two things here. The recent presidential drawdown authority announcement, that was $1 billion. That was announced on, again, last week as well, on the 24th. So more the beginning of the week, or the middle of the week, I guess. We don't actually know whether that was drawn on the existing $3.9 billion, or whether that's tapping the new
Right.
7.8 billion drawdown authority for the new fiscal year that we're in. They didn't say. So this is one of the myriad questions that I can only pray that some journalists will have the sense to ask, because these are actually quite relevant questions. And though it may not be apparent to people now, it'll eventually be quite apparent why that's very important.
Is that because the 3.9 billion that's left over, can that be spent on other conflicts? Or is it because I presume the 7.8 at the moment on this Ukraine new supplemental is for Ukraine, but the previous presidential drawdown I thought was for the whole world. Is that right?
No, actually, it's the reverse, because the only reason why that authority is still available is because under the Biden administration's interpretation of the law, they already notified Congress that that authority would be used to draw down defense articles to Ukraine. So once you send the notification to Congress, that's the critical piece in a drawdown. You notify Congress, and then you're able to execute that drawdown. And once it's notified, there's no time limit set on how that execution has to take. So even though drawdown authority is set yearly and it expires, if you have unused authority, it doesn't carry over to the next year. If you've notified to Congress that you're going to execute a drawdown, you can execute that drawdown basically indefinitely. So because under their interpretation, and again, this is where people have to read the very long 100-tweet thread if you want to understand this, because it is quite complicated, but if you want to understand, you have to go read the thread. Under their interpretation, they already notified Congress so that they still have those authority still available to them. So it's locked in for Ukraine. It can only go to Ukraine because Congress was told it's for Ukraine. Whereas the new authority, even though ostensibly it was in the Ukraine bill, but actually every one of the three bills, Ukraine, Indo-Pacific Command, and Israel, all had the same clause in there for Section 506 to increase the drawdown authority cap to 7.8 billion. So that's a global cap. That applies to all countries in the world at $7.8 billion for all of them. Now, that said, I don't expect that that authority will be used for countries other than Ukraine. Perhaps Israel a little bit, but as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been used for Israel to date because there are some other mechanisms that the United States has been using to support Israel. So it's more than likely all of that should be available for Ukraine going forward.
And so then why is it that the US waited until after this bill? I mean, my theorizing was that they waited till after the bill was secured so that they knew they had the bill in place. It didn't also make people think, well, they have got money. If they were spending the rest of the PDA and USAI in this like fallow period, that you might have had people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Well, they got money, so they definitely don't need any more. So I was thinking they were waiting until the bill went through, then they would know exactly how much they have going forward, because there might not be any more, and then they spend it. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah. Again, my very long thread that I wrote gets into this question of why was this done? They have 3.9 billion. Why did they wait until now to use it? Because they were free to use it. Their argument was that, oh, well, we can't because we don't have any funding for the replacement account so that we can buy new stuff to replace what we're going to send to Ukraine. That argument never made any sense. I explained why it didn't make any sense. Ultimately, I think it was it's all politics. They staked out their position, illogical as it was, and they didn't really want to deviate from that. And in their view, their position was, it was a leverage or a tool to try and compel Congress to do what they wanted. And I don't think that was the case either. But that seems to be their view of the situation and why they pursued the course of action that they chose.
So, talking about how now they've got quite a bit of USAI, and they have just spent $6 billion, but there's quite a bit more that can be spent. Do you expect them to spend that kind of money up front now? I know they didn't previously, and we waited just to spend that $6 billion, but that is used to put contracts in predominantly to the US defense industry that then takes time for them to upscale or manufacture or whatever it is they need to do. And that can take anywhere between, having that in their stocks now up to like a couple of years, maybe to if it gets put to the back of the queue, and we can talk about expediting. So would you advise that the US just spends a lot of that now?
Yes, there's absolutely no reason to wait. They previously, between the 4 past Ukraine Supplemental Appropriations Acts before this one, there was a combination of $18.9 billion appropriated for USAI. And they only just very recently contracted the remaining 6.6 billion that still had not been contracted. And these funds had been already committed many months ago. So they had the 6.6 billion. They said, okay, we're sending a notification to Congress now. Congress, this is what we want to spend these $6.6 billion on. And Congress says, yeah, okay, go do that. And then it takes them months and months and months to actually get those $6.6 billion onto contract. And yes, you have to do contract negotiations. There are some things that need to happen. But Congress gave the Department of Defense special rapid contracting authorities to use for anything that's Ukraine related. And even with those contracting authorities, the process is still taking a very long time. Yeah, it is faster than it would normally take. Normally, the process is molasses, but it's not much better right now. And in many cases, we're talking about, again, things are already being committed to specific systems in many cases where you're going to have a sole source contract award because you've got a system that's only made by one company. So like Vampire, for example, which is a short range sort of system that the U.S. has been advertising as a counter unmanned aerial system capability that they gave to Ukraine. It took them like months and months and months to get that on contract, even though it's, they decided they were going to provide the system. There's only one company that makes it, L3Harris, so you don't need to have any sort of competition or anything. So why does it take months and months just to negotiate the contract? Things need to happen a little bit faster than that. So when you've got systems that might take years to actually produce and deliver, why are we going to spend a year just thinking about what we want to give to Ukraine to add a whole nother year to the process? Get the contract signed as quickly as possible so that these companies can start making, because otherwise we're just pointlessly dragging out the entire process here and delaying the date at which Ukraine will finally receive what they are being promised.
Yeah, and that's probably a good segue onto Patriots, but actually I'll just wait a second for that. So in terms of the supplemental package as a whole, and really paring that down from 61 billion to 20 odd billion, depending on how you slice and dice it. So it's probably only a third of that is going to go to actual military equipment to Ukraine, plus what was left over from previous. Is that enough? How long is that going to last for? How likely is it that the US will sign? I know it's going to depend an awful lot, entirely on the November 2024 elections. What are your thoughts on how long lasting this will be?
Yeah, well, I mean, how long anything lasts depends on the pace at which it is dispersed, right? So the administration to date has taken the approach of just really giving Ukraine aid in fairly small increments. And with the amount of aid that's been authorized and appropriated in this latest bill, again, we're not going to see too much of a shift in that because if they started giving Ukraine very large batches of aid, it would run out very quickly. And again, with the USAI, you want to get that all on contract as soon as possible. But with the drawdown packages, Ukraine needs regular packages, but they need big ones as well. And there's not enough authority to do both in this bill. And National Security Advisor Sullivan said that this will be sufficient to carry Ukraine throughout 2024. And what I said was that, yeah, it'll need to, because I don't think that Congress will necessarily pass any additional Ukraine. There won't be a new quote unquote Ukraine bill this year. I wouldn't expect one before the end of the fiscal year. I don't think that we should necessarily expect one during the lame duck session between when the election in the United States happens in November and when the new Congress gets sworn in, and whoever the president is elected in January. So it's going to have to last for quite some time until January potentially. So you can count the months between now and January and then divide the amount of presidential drawdown authority and that's basically how much Ukraine can expect to get on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So
my thoughts, and I don't want to be political here, I'm trying to be pragmatic actually, is that the most preferable situation in November 2024 is a trifecta for the Democrats. So where you have a Biden, the Senate and that House of Representatives all with the same party, and that's that party being the one that's more likely to support Ukraine as it stands. So I think the most beneficial situation for Ukraine only is a trifecta, Democrat trifecta. Second best option is Biden and the House of Representatives, because they're the ones that are difficult for on the Republican side. And if the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, that's your second most likely to get stuff through for Ukraine. And then every other iteration is a big problem for Ukraine. So that's why, yeah, it's all about November. Okay, so going on to Patriots, and we have this situation where Germany is scrabbling around trying to get Patriots. It's done a really good job. It is now provided or has pledged 3 Patriot systems, which is, and you can explain the importance of the system as a whole and all those component parts. The Netherlands has provided a couple of launchers. The US has provided a battery previously. Now, can the USAI be used to order Patriots, and why didn't they order Patriots 2 years ago, and why haven't they ordered Patriots now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish that somebody would explicitly ask it to the administration, because as far as I'm aware, it's never been really directly put to them that way. Yes, the USI funds can absolutely be used to place orders to Raytheon for new Patriot systems. The Ukrainians certainly want that money to be used that way. We can hear them very clearly that additional Patriot systems is their number one concern. Yes, of course, they need more ammunition, both for Patriot and everything else. They always need more ammunition, but they need more actual systems so that they can cover off more territory. Because right now, basically, with the handful of systems that they have, they're focusing on protecting their major cities and some critical infrastructure. Right, the front line has very little in the way of air defenses, because those Patriots are protecting Kyiv or maybe Odessa or some other locales that are important that the Ukrainian government has decided to prioritize. So they don't have Patriots to protect troops on the front line from Russian fighter aircraft doing strikes with glide bombs, and those are very, very devastating to Ukrainian forces. And this is something that is
the biggest challenge, I think.
Yeah,
that one.
It's not talked about enough. The media, I feel, is very mostly unaware of this problem, right? Because it's very easy to go into Kyiv and take pictures and videos of apartment buildings being bombed, and obviously that's horrible. But there's fewer people on the front line that are getting an appreciation of how devastating these UMPK glide bomb attacks are, and the only solution to that problem is Patriot. Don't count on F-16s for solving the problem either. They might help a little bit, but especially at the beginning when there's only going to be a small number of F-16s available, it's not going to do anything. It's not really going to change the situation. So
yeah, their range, I think, on air-to-airs isn't as great as some people I think are expecting. So, and considering some of these glide bombs supposedly can be released like 90 kilometers away, that it makes it even more challenging for the Ukrainians to shoot them down from the air. It's my take.
Yes. So yeah, I don't know why the administration has continued to resist ordering new Patriots for Ukraine. If they had done so 2 years ago, as you said, we wouldn't need to have this conversation about whether anybody should give up their existing Patriot stocks. Ukraine would already have new Patriots coming off the assembly line.
Is it just because they're like really expensive? I mean, how much are they?
No, it's not because they're super, super expensive. Now, how much they cost is going to be very highly variable depending on a number of different factors, including what the composition of your battery or your fire unit is, because it is a modular system. There's no one, single configuration that you have to buy in. You can buy more or less components, right? You can buy just one radar. You could buy multiple radars. You can buy a lot of launchers or just a few launchers. But in sort of like a minimum average configuration of having 3 or 4 launch vehicles, 1 radar, 1 engagement control system, and then the other ancillary support equipment, power generators, things like that. You're probably talking about 400 million, perhaps, Again, there's variations there, but somewhere in that ballpark. So it's not an absurdly large amount of money. And again, there's a lot of USAI funds here available. It is beyond me why in a $6 billion package there couldn't be any money that is specifically allocated. Yes, we're going to procure this many additional Patriot systems for Ukraine. I don't know why that wasn't done. The Department of Defense actually said they're one of the top DoD assistant secretaries who's in charge of Europe. She said in a congressional hearing that this is something that they would actually consider doing, but here we have a $6 billion commitment, and I don't see Patriot systems listed in that package anywhere. So I'm struggling to understand why the administration has such a problem with doing this. It seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, so I mean, I just wanted to show this. My audience would have seen stuff like this before, but this is the integrated. I mean, there's lots of letters here, so it's the IAMD IBCS, which is basically an integrated system that the Americans had designed and created and gave Ukraine the first one, as far as I understand it. And this joins together all their air defenses. So this goes then to like, well, could it be that they could just like pick and choose bits from the Patriot and then add extra launchers? I mean, can they like, do you know what they're particularly lacking in terms of the components?
Yeah, they need complete fire units here. So yes, they got one IBCS EOC, that's Engagement Operations Center. So that's the new command vehicle that Northrop Grumman has developed. That's going to be a key node for all American air defense forces going forward, including Patriot, and be able to network them all together, as this PowerPoint slide is showing. But one of the really key things is radars, because radars are definitely a limiting factor. They're one of the most complicated components of the system. Launch vehicles are relatively straightforward, but radar production is very much a bottleneck. So Ukraine needs additional radars, so that you need to be able to detect the incoming threat, and then you need to have your launcher that's capable of sending an interceptor up to shoot it down, right? So we could send Ukraine a bunch of extra launchers, but without additional radars, those launchers are limited in what they can do, because they're going to have to be tethered to a radar, and they have to be in range of each other for the radar to feed that information to the launcher via the ECS or the EOC to shoot it down.
Yeah. So, I mean, am I right in thinking that that the Americans have about 60 of these systems, and while that sounds like a lot, and people are going, oh, why can't the US give systems to Ukraine? They actually don't have enough systems themselves, considering how big their own country is geographically, and also their commitments around the world. And they do have a bit of elbow room for some rotation of systems, but really they don't have enough themselves. But they do have a lot of pieces in storage. How usable would they be? Are they too old? Are they just the launchers? Tell us about where America's at, where the US is at the moment.
Yeah, so there's some uncertainty around this. I know a lot of people say that there's all this stuff available that could be sent. It's not quite as simple as that. Yes, there's definitely tons of launchers in storage, because the U.S. used to have a very large Patriot force during the Cold War, and then after the Cold War, the U.S. Army Air Defense Artillery, probably more than any other component of the U.S. Armed Forces, has really been gutted quite badly after the Cold War, and it's really only started to slowly rebuild. So certainly there's probably lots of launchers available, but whether there are usable radars and usable engagement control stations available, that's a different question. The U.S. Army doesn't have enough Patriot assets for their own needs. Yes, it's about 15 battalions, and those on average in the U.S. organization have 4 batteries each, but that's not enough for their own needs. Yes, there's always spare systems that are available, or at least spare components that could be cobbled together theoretically into a system. And these are the conversations that need to be had. But the U.S. Army likes to keep these spares to ensure that they can always deploy and rotate things as needed, because they have an ongoing recapitalization program. So at any given point, there's a lot of these assets have been rotated out to undergo recapitalization, or they're having light maintenance done, or they're about to undergo maintenance. So they're very hesitant to give anything up lest they have a situation where they need to pull these assets into their own operational formations for deployment overseas. And I said before October 7th, it was very unlikely that Ukraine was going to get more Patriots out of the U.S. Army. After October 7th, I said it was basically zero, because the U.S. Army had to surge all these Patriot units into Central Command to deal with the threat there. And the U.S. Patriot Force was already extremely taxed before then, and that's only gotten worse.
Yeah, and so I know you've given the justification there, but for what it's worth, in your opinion, is that justified? So, as in, if you were in charge of the US, would you say, "Yeah, not too sure about them, thanks"?
Yeah, good question. If I was in charge, I would give CENTCOM's Patriot battalion to Ukraine. Not CENTCOM, EUCOM. Your U.S. European Command has a Patriot battalion. It's better off in Ukraine than it is in Poland. And again, that decision wouldn't have to be made if they had just ordered new Patriots for Ukraine 2 years ago. But because that decision wasn't taken, now President Biden's in the position where he's the president. He has to make that decision. And so far, the advice he's getting from the U.S. Army and the DoD is don't do it, but he's got to make a decision.
Yeah, I think the key here is, because I often see like presidents, and this can happen no matter what you think of whatever president, but often presidents make a decision, but they aren't the experts in that. And they are probably reiterating just what they're being told by the army, because, you know, Biden doesn't know what the coverage of Patriots are and whether that's it. So I'm pretty sure that would be coming from the DoD.
Yeah,
but you're right. It's like, by the way, how many batteries in a battalion?
4 on average for the U.S. is my understanding. Yeah, about 60 batteries organized into like 15 battalions.
So that would be, you know, 4 batteries from Europe, just pushed further forward in Europe. They'll still be in Europe. And let's face it, they were defending really against the Russians anyway. This is a whole theory of like Denmark giving all their artillery, because like, well, this artillery has been designed and purchased literally with the Soviet Union or like Russia in mind. So, you know, they're not going to be invading Denmark, but they are invading Ukraine, and they're the first step along the way. So we might as well give them all to Ukraine. And that's the kind of same theory that you're saying with the EUCOM giving the American Patriots in Europe to Ukraine.
Yes. So what you do, you have those 4 battalions, those 4 American battalions, plus the 5th one that had already been sent, or 4 batteries, excuse me. So 5 U.S. batteries. Those would all be covering rear areas in Ukraine. It'd be covering Kyiv and other cities, other strategic locations that need to be protected. You'd use those 5 batteries for that, and they'd be all networked with the IBCS EOC, and you hopefully get them some more fire relays as well. And then you could network them all together. They'd all speak to each other across Ukraine. And then you'd use all 3 German batteries would be all deployed to the front line, because those ones are all truck mounted systems rather than the American systems are on trailers. So the German systems can actually in place and deplace quicker than the American systems can, because they're on a truck and not a trailer. The TELs are on a truck. So those cover the front line then, which they've already done that in some cases. They've done these ambush attacks on Russian aircraft. So you'd put the German ones on the front, and they would protect the frontline forces from the Russian fixed-wing aviation.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, obviously. What do you think the chances of Poland allowing their Patriots to have some sort of purchase into Western Ukraine from Poland?
The Polish government seems to be extremely against doing that. I've seen no indication that that's something they're considering.
because it came up again. Like there were a few murmurs about that this morning and yesterday. So I was just wondering about that. Somebody's asked about a FAD system. Do you want to just explain what that is and why you think it's probably unlikely that that's going to be brought to bear?
Yes, I got this question on Tochny yesterday, so
Yeah.
I'll say it again for those that missed the Tochny stream yesterday. But you should always make sure that you listen to tune in.
It's a really good stream. Like Colby's section at the end of that video is really worth listening to.
Yeah, so if you want more air defense content, I mean, we're talking about a lot of the same things I talked about then the end of yesterday's stream. But anyway, so THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. A lot of people have this conception of THAAD just being a better Patriot. It is not. It's a different system with a different purpose. THAAD is designed to intercept much longer range missiles than Patriot is. Patriot is a force protection area defense system against tactical ballistic missiles or short-range ballistic missiles, and some medium-range missiles, but mostly short-range ballistic missiles and air-breathing targets as well. THAAD is designed to intercept medium-range, intermediate-range ballistic missiles. THAAD has a engagement floor of 40 kilometers. Perhaps a little bit less than that or lower than that is the classified figure, but the widely understood unclassified figure is 40 kilometers. So anything flying below 40 kilometers, it can't shoot down. And Zircon, for example, which is Russia's actual hypersonic cruise missile, that's flying at probably 30 kilometers. So THAAD most likely would not be able to shoot down Zircon, or it'd be very challenging for it to do so. So THAAD is not a system that would actually help Ukraine, really, given the spectrum of threats that Russia is using. Like Iskander, maybe I'd have to double check the flight profiles for Iskander, whether you would even be able to shoot down Iskander. In many cases, Iskander is probably flying, again, below its engagement floor. THAAD is also an extremely expensive system. The United States is not going to give up a THAAD to Ukraine. It's not going to order a THAAD for Ukraine. Obviously, President Biden, for whatever reason, doesn't want to even order Ukraine a Patriot. He's not going to order them a THAAD, which is a vastly more expensive system, which already has a relatively significant backlog as well. Saudi Arabia has 7 THAAD batteries, I believe it is, on order. So Ukraine wouldn't get their THAAD battery for like a decade, probably. So yeah,
that prompts another question just in there. Actually, how likely is it, and has this already happened in many cases? I don't know. How easy is it for Ukraine to be prioritized up the list of countries? Does it depend on the government in the US or the defense concerns themselves?
Whoever the customers are ahead of them in the queue basically need to agree. And different countries have different laws, but speaking for the United States, if the United States government has a foreign military sales contract with another government to deliver them a specific defense system, they have a negotiated and agreed to delivery schedule for that system. And yeah, sometimes production delays happen, and those things are accounted for. But the United States government doesn't have the ability to just unilaterally modify that contract schedule and give prioritization to somebody else. Like theoretically, they could do it, but then they'd open themselves up to legal liability, and it would be a very bad problem for them, and it would call into the question the whole credibility of the foreign military sales program. So, to my knowledge, it has never been done for that reason. You might have a sale get canceled for other reasons because a country is determined to, be in violation of U.S. law, or there's some other circumstances. But I'm not aware of any circumstance in which the United States government has just unilaterally said, "Oh, we're actually going to give it to this guy first ahead of you," even though you already paid, even though you had a contract. The customer has to agree to that, and it's even more true for a direct commercial sale. If a country places a direct commercial sale with a U.S. company, whether it's Lockheed or Raytheon, whatever, and says, "We're giving you money, build us this thing," the company can't go and say, "Well, actually, I'm going to build it for this guy first, even though you already paid me and we have a contract." The customer has to agree, and efforts have been made to negotiate these things. Efforts have actually been made to buy back systems from countries that already have things in stock.
Yeah.
Raytheon tried to buy back NASAM systems from Middle Eastern countries. As far as I'm aware, most of that has been unsuccessful. And obviously the countries in the Middle East, made the right decision given what's happening right now. Nobody in that neighborhood wants to give up their air defenses right now.
Because you've got that Canadian one that's still not been delivered. But as far as I'm aware, that's the US's fault, not Canada's fault. But
it's Canada's fault for ordering a system that we shouldn't have ordered, because the US had already pledged a huge number of NASAM systems for Ukraine. So why are we just adding one more thing to the queue? Right? Because it's going to get built after everything that the United States has already ordered. We spent 400 million Canadian on that, when our domestic companies that are involved in the production of 155 artillery asked the government for how much? They asked for $400 million to establish M795 155 millimeter artillery shell production in Canada. So we could have spent that 400 million on building new artillery shells. Instead, we're sending that money to Massachusetts and Norway to buy a system that won't be delivered to Ukraine for years.
Well, maybe the lap dancing club they took the ministers out for to sweeten that deal wasn't quite as good as the one that NASAMS did. Who knows? So interesting stuff. So just the last bit on Patriots would be that the producers for the missiles are different to the actual systems. What's the situation with the production and procurement of Patriot missiles? And I presume PAC-3, like the most recent variants.
Yeah. So Raytheon makes the actual systems themselves. Lockheed is the company that is producing PAC-3 MSE missile segment enhancement, which is the only missile that the United States Army is procuring for itself right now. MSE is about $4 million a missile. It's very expensive, but it's a very, very, very capable missile. It's in a whole other class compared to anything else in the same ballpark. So missile production is scaling. It's increasing. It's at least 500 a month right now. They're working on getting up to 550, 600, 650. So it is scaling. Obviously, that could be bigger and better. But with missiles, the U.S. still has quite considerable stocks of Patriot missiles. So that's way less concerning for me than the systems themselves. The United States has the capacity to continue to draw down missiles for Ukraine. But the issue is Ukraine just doesn't have enough batteries.
Right, fair enough. What someone said here, Patriots are focused on major areas of defense or infrastructure. That was a Thab one that we had earlier. Okay, so then moving on to Storm Shadow, we have a situation that was quite surprising this week, whereby we found out really through the Secretary of Defense in the UK, Grant Shapps, that Italy have actually been providing, it appears to be Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine as well. Do we know how many? Do we know how many Storm Shadows are going in general? What's the situation there? Because there's been this call to order more to NBDA, but that doesn't seem to have happened. And then Grant Shapps came out and said, well, look, I'm walking around the production line, thus hinting that there are new orders for Storm Shadows, but then that could be midlife update. So can you tell us, I know there's a lot there to unpack, but what's your take?
Yeah, so with Italy, there's definitely a bit of a disagreement perhaps on what exactly is happening there, depending on who you ask. Italy is definitely involved in some capacity. I'm willing to take the minister at his word on that. And certainly, I know my colleague Fabian Hoffman has said that he understands that 50 missiles were provided from Italy, either directly to Ukraine or indirectly, where they went to France, and then France sent more missiles to Ukraine, some sort of like one of these ring deals, perhaps. Yeah. And there are some other Italian contacts that I have that are more towards that's what happened. They're kind of skeptical that Italy sent missiles directly to Ukraine. There's also the question of how many. Fabian was saying 50. Other people were saying, oh, geez, the Italians had less than 100. So that would be, more than half their inventory that they'd be sending off potentially. So
Right.
it's a little bit uncertain exactly what's happening there. And again, the Italian government is one of these governments that is not very transparent about what they provide to Ukraine. So we're not going to have clarity on that, I suspect. As for what's going on with Storm Shadow production in the UK, so UK shut down their Storm Shadow production line quite some time ago. They bought missiles for themselves. I think there were a few export customers, but they were not building new missiles. But they had a midlife upgrade program for their existing inventory missiles to ensure that they were still in good usable condition. And my understanding was that that was supposed to have completed a while ago, but there's some indication that maybe it didn't complete or it's been restarted to refurbish some additional missiles. I'm skeptical right now that this is a production line for new missiles. If that was the case, I suspect we'd be hearing that more explicitly, that yes, we're building lots of brand new Storm Shadow missiles that just didn't exist before, rather than refurbishing existing missiles.
This looks like a technician, punching in a few different bits and pieces to some circuitry there. So it doesn't really look like a production line, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what was shown in this clip is these missiles are already in substantial completion. So if they showed things in far less substantial completion, I might be more inclined to believe that they were actually building things from scratch. But we shall see. And I hear things which I'll call them, rumor maybe. I don't know. I mean, there are certain things that I've been told that I won't repeat because I can't validate them personally, but I'm just skeptical right now. And I just caution, what I said on Twitter was, I'm cautioning people not to get their hopes up too much here, because our alliance has had a huge problem with over-promising and under-delivering. So I don't want people to suddenly believe that we're building all these brand new cruise missiles for Ukraine when we're in fact not doing that. So the responsible course of action here is to assume it isn't happening.
Yeah. And it's really frustrating for me. I've long argued that one of the ways that Ukraine prevails in this war is, particularly now, is they sit back for 6 months or a year and just hammer the crap out of the Russians with distance munitions, sort of, whether that be, HIMARS and long distance artillery and drones, or certainly cruise missiles and ATACMS. And so I think the UK would have been good to have specialized early on much earlier in the war. And I did say this, we should just have been building Storm Shadow missiles, cruise missiles. You guys concentrate on these other things that the UK has also been helping with. We're not going to do that. We're just going to put all our money into cruise missiles and give Ukraine just a ton of cruise missiles. I know it's expensive, but that was my theory, like specialization in that respect. Does that have any merit? I mean, I can't think that you would disagree that we shouldn't have at least started the production line up again.
Yeah, of course. Everybody should have done this 2 years ago. There are so many things that were obviously should have been done at the beginning of the war that we're still just talking about it only today. We're not even doing it yet. We're just having conversations. Right, the French.
It's almost like it's too late now. Oh, because we didn't do it. Oh, we can't do it now.
Well, that's it. People are, giving that justification. It was like, oh well, it's too late. What does it matter now? There's always some other excuse. The goalposts are always changing. There's always a new excuse why things can't be done. And I try to be very realistic about things that can be done and can't be done. So if I'm saying this isn't a viable solution, it's probably because I really believe, based on my research, that it's not viable. But if something can be done, I'm going to say, yeah, it can be done. There's a lot that could be done that just hasn't been done.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's Storm Shadow. We'll move on to ATACMS as we have to fit this stuff in before you go. ATACMS. So obviously, there's been a lot of talk about these and the longer range usage of them. There's this talk about because Jake Sullivan said no, you can't use them into Russia. Then Lloyd Austin was like, oh yeah, no, Ukraine can use them when and how they like. Didn't talk about where. It was all a bit vague. I presume that we're not going to see ATACMS used into Russian territory.
No, I'd be stunned to see a reversal of that policy. Everything that we've heard from the administration has remained pretty explicit that Ukraine is not to use any of these weapons on Russian territory, and that's not just American weapons. Like we can see, there haven't been any Storm Shadow strikes on Russian territory either. So it's fairly
Although there is a
clear
bit
that
of a difference, because I think on the UK and France a little bit more. There's a little bit more elbow room. We've had like Ben Wallace. I know he's not the Secretary of Defense anymore, but saying that yeah, we should be able to allow the Ukrainians to use them into Russian territory. So I think there's more scope for Storm Shadows to be used, although there haven't been. Is that fair?
Yes, and if I'm not misremembering, President Macron said pretty explicitly that he thinks that there are legitimate targets inside Russia. So yes, France, UK, and many other countries are in agreement on that. But it's the United States and Germany that are adamant that not happen. And based on the fact that we don't really see Ukraine hitting Russia with anything other than their own domestic systems, it's fairly clear that both Washington and Berlin have been able to browbeat everybody else in this alliance into agreeing with their position that it's too escalatory and too risky for Ukraine to be striking Russia with any of these donated weapons. Even if the French or the British are okay with it, Washington has basically told them, or President Biden has told them, no, you can't. Ukraine is not allowed to do it. Everybody's been in the room together, and that's been made clear to them. And the Ukrainians are abiding by that because they're not going to bite the hand, right? But they need that capability.
Yeah, my theory has been that probably since the beginning of the war, on the one hand, US, and I use US as an example, but you can substitute US for many other countries, have said, right, you can't use our stuff to fire into Russia. But I'll tell you what, we are going to work with your industrial complex to manufacture your own indigenous missiles with tech that we're going to kind of lend you or whatever to produce missiles that can, so that you can take full responsibility. Do you think the US has been involved in that kind of process?
Well, file that under another thing that should have happened 2 years ago. I don't believe that it has been happening in the latest drawdown package or USAI package. I forget which. There was a line about some assistance being provided to improve the capacity of Ukraine to manufacture UAS and other capabilities. So that's very welcome to finally see that spelled out, because again, should have been done a long time ago. But the fact that 2 years into the war, Ukraine still has not been able to bring to maturity any of its other domestic missile programs like SAPSAN or some of the other ones, that indicates to me that we haven't really been giving them that level of assistance over the past couple of years.
That'd be really frustrating. I mean, hopefully the Neptune missile, with supposedly it's 1,000-kilometer range, traditionally an anti-ship missile, but as we can see throughout this war, anti-ship missiles are being used to blow up buildings and all sorts of stuff. So hopefully the Neptune can be scaled up and used effectively. Onto the ATACMS more formally, what's the situation with the number of ATACMS that the US is expected or can give to Ukraine, and what types?
Yeah, so they said over 100 had already been provided or were in the process of being provided, and I think Jake Sullivan said that they were in a position to continue delivering a significant number. You can see my graph that I have that you've put up there on the screen of what the inventory of the United States is. There were around 1,200 missiles that were quote unquote expired, so past their shelf life, but obviously still in usable condition, because Ukraine back in last September was provided with about 20 of those blue missiles, the oldest ones, the M39. So all of the ones that are even younger than that should presumably be in usable condition as well. And the United States can inspect those missiles. Of course, they have to inspect them before they provide them, just to make sure that they are safe. So if they pass their ultrasound test and all other checks that are done, then they can be given to Ukraine. So I've long said, give those 1,200 missiles to Ukraine, because that's the number that we're talking about. Ukraine needs like hundreds, if not thousands, of long-range missiles, because that's what Russia has.
And that's why I was saying, like 6 months, sit back 6 months of like constant use of ATACMS and Storm Shadows, and honestly, it'll be a completely different battlefield. Do you think that the US has waited to give these until they got the new Prism, the replacement to this missile online?
No, I don't think that these are linked. I said that there is no linkage in law. I don't think that there's a formal linkage in policy either. But again, the administration can use whatever excuses they want. But the number of prisms that have been delivered is very small, and I'll refer people back to my thread I did on ATACMS. I put up graphs on this. We're talking about like 1 to 2 dozen prisms, precision strike missiles that have been produced so far. And if the United States is giving Ukraine over 100 ATACMS, obviously they're not viewing this as, oh, well, we can only give so many ATACMS as we have already replaced with PRSM. It's not how it works. And again, I went into this in my lengthy thread on Drawdown Authority. We're not talking about a 1-to-1 replacement here, because one PRSM is much more capable than an old ATACMS, right? Much longer range. Especially the future increments are going to be much more capable. So it's not a 1-to-1 thing here. It's not how it works.
So you think it's escalation versus strategic, the reason why it's taken so long for ATACMS to get there?
Yeah, the administration just doesn't want to provide certain capabilities to Ukraine because they've said explicitly that they are very concerned about certain systems being too escalatory. That's been said explicitly. So
yeah. And then finally, before we will rush through a couple of questions, but we've got GLSDB, which is a ground launched small diameter bomb. These are bombs that have been a bit like JDAM in the air, that have given glide kits to allow them to glide further, get precision, and have a greater range, etc., using initially a dumb bomb. Here we have sort of rockets that are adapted to be given greater range and precision, to be fired from multiple launch rocket systems like the HIMARS system. Now, these were the Boeing Saab co-production that were much anticipated. Everyone's excited about them coming online. They've now come online and they've been a bit of a letdown. What's your understanding of this?
So there's apparently a number of issues that are impacting the usefulness of GLSDB. My colleague John Ridge from Tochny has written extensively about different reasons why he thinks that this is happening. So I tell people to just check out what he's written, because it's far more detailed explanation than I can offer. Russian electronic warfare is definitely a factor at play. It's impacting all of the GPS-guided munitions that Ukraine is using, including GIMLRs, including JDAM, and the United States has worked with Ukraine to make software revisions to harden them against Russian electronic warfare. And even still, Ukraine is, they might have to deploy two munitions for a strike mission, whereas in an uninterrupted GPS environment, they would only need to use one. So they have to kind of double things up to ensure that they're going to achieve the necessary effects. So with GLSDB, it seems like it's a little bit more susceptible, and there may be some other issues at play just with the manufacture of the system. So it is too bad, but GLSDB was likely never really going to arrive in sufficient quantities to have a huge impact anyway. So it just reemphasizes that we need to look at other systems, and that we shouldn't view this as as something that was going to really change things for Ukraine. It redoubles the importance of things like ATACMS, Storm Shadow, and other systems.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that. Julian Roster, thanks so much for this, mate. Says JP and Colby, I love this question. If you were POTUS, so President of the United States, what would you send to Ukraine that hasn't already been sent?
Well, obviously Patriots, we talked about that. I mean, they got one, but they need a lot more. So it's a lot of it is just they need more of things that they've already been given. There's not a huge long list of things that that haven't been sent that need to be. But I would add, certainly with the F-16s coming, they need to receive some American cruise missiles as well for those, because as we've been discussing with Storm Shadow, Scalp PG, there's big issues there with building new missiles. So the U.S. has deep stocks of missiles, and they have greater capacity to build new missiles. So Things like Slam ER, I'd like to see that provided, which is an air-launched cruise missile. And then as well, the baseline JASM is something that I've long been skeptical would be sent, but certainly would be a very good thing to send to Ukraine.
I don't know. I get a sense that with that bill coming through, and with F-16s maybe coming online, that I don't know. Like, I think there's a lot of scope to send these, and they do have quite a lot of them. No, so what do you think? Is it just an escalation argument again?
It's the number of things. So yes, there's a lot of them. Again, they've had authority to provide them for 2 years. I mean, the Presidential Drawdown Authority allows them to send anything out of inventory, and USAI allows them to buy anything that isn't in inventory. So there's never been any lack of authority to transfer things to Ukraine. It's all been a political question. So inventory, yes, there is a lot of them, but the U.S. also needs a lot of them because JASM is a key munition for the U.S. military, particularly as it pertains to the Indo-Pacific. Although, my colleague John is going to write some things about this in the future, perhaps. But also, yes, escalation. I mean, ATACMS for a long time had been a bridge too far for the administration, where they fear was too escalatory. JASM is also quite long range. So there seems to be significant hesitance to providing them Ukraine with capability that could go far into Russian territory potentially.
And a final question for you, just in general, what's your idea of what's happening with the F-16s? We heard today that they are. I've talked a lot about this, and one idea I had was that, and I don't know how realistic this is. I presume it's not, but to me, it seems a great workaround, which is having F-16s stored in Poland and Romania, and when you need them for missions, they fly, drop down at Ukrainian base for refueling and take off from there. And then effectively they're just being stored overnight, if you like, or between missions in NATO countries so that they can't be hit, because we know that Russia's going to know exactly where these F-16s, there's only so many places they can take off from. They're not as versatile as a Gripen. What are your thoughts on that? Because there was an announcement today that was they are building or possibly building bunkers and places to keep them, or they're thinking about dispersing them very carefully. Any thoughts about F-16s in general and that?
Yeah, I'm skeptical that we're going to see them based in NATO countries and then flying their missions from those NATO bases. Again, I think that the Biden administration and the German government, Chancellor Scholz, they would view that as like way too escalatory, and they're just going to push back against any suggestion at NATO that could happen. And the U.S. can basically veto something like that because these are American planes, so they have a lot of control over how they're employed, right? So they're going to say no to that. So they're going to be based in Ukraine. Russia doesn't seem to have been too successful at trying to target Ukraine's inventory of fencers, which are the legacy Soviet jets, which are deploying the Storm Shadows right now. So I'm not super concerned. I think we're going to be able to destroy all these on the tarmac and find where they're at and destroy them. My main question is, we know that they're going to be arriving sometime this summer. The main question is, what do they arrive with, right? Like we were just talking the previous question. Is the United States going to make some cruise missiles available to them? Are they going to provide, have we been using this time over the past months to upgrade the radars, because the radars are a weak point?
Which is what they apparently were doing.
I've heard a lot of suggestion about this. I haven't seen anything that is at the level of confirmation for me. I know a lot of people have been saying this, talking about it. There have been implications. If people have really good information about it, please send it to me. But
I
haven't seen anything that confirms it.
I thought that the Ukrainian Air Force had announced that was taking place, but yeah, I'd have to look back into that.
Yeah. Anyway, so upgraded radars, and then there's all sorts of other things, targeting pods. I wrote a piece for the Insider about these questions, so people can go look that up. It's the first thing I wrote for the Insider, is on the question of what ATACMS and F-16s were going to mean for Ukraine, and I get into these questions about how useful they'll be and what kind of munitions they're going to need to be very effective on the battlefield. So if people want a more in-depth explanation on that, then you can go check out that piece I wrote for the Insider last year.
Yeah, so in fact, for now, as we're sort of coming to the end of this, please check Colby's his articles out at the Insider, which is a sort of Russian exiled media source. Well worth checking out his pieces there. Of course, there's Tochny that Colby is a part of, that you can find them on both Twitter and YouTube. There was a good 3-hour video last night that's well worth looking at. It had Andrew Perpetua's mapping update, as well as Colby talking through some of the things we've been talking about today. Is there anything? There are lots more questions I have to ask you, but I know you've got to get on now. So is there anything that you think that you haven't said that you would like to have said?
No, we covered a lot of territory in an hour, and I just want to thank you again for having me back on. And I'm certainly happy to come back on in the future and take more audience questions if there's some that we didn't get to, and whatever else you wanted to ask me. I can certainly make time and come back in the future.
Absolutely, that'd be wonderful. Well, look, mate, I'm free and easy. So, you know, whenever you want to come back on, say, hit me up like you did this time. It's absolutely perfect, because then I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. So, look, thank you so much. I know you're going to go and feature on Jonathan Fink, Silicon Curtain. My audience know that channel very well. I've had Jonathan on here, and I've been on his. So, good luck with that one, and everyone should check that out when it comes out. Thank you, Colby. Really appreciate your appearance here today, or your contributions. It's been fascinating.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Okay, well, I'm going to stay on for a little bit, actually, and just see if there are a few more questions. But Colby, you're free to go. Thank you so much again, my friend.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Ta-da. Okay, so thanks so much to Colby there. I'm actually going to hang out for a little bit with you guys, because, hey, that is my want. I'm just going to check to see whether there are any questions that I can possibly give my opinion on. I am not the expert, though, in defense matters that Colby is, but there were a few questions that would be nice to answer. Here's one of them. I'm hopeful to see GLSDBs adapted to clean up the front line. Otherwise, when and how do they succeed? Can't rebuild the guidance, or can it be done by Ukrainians? One of the things I wanted to ask Colby, and I'll ask him next time, is he was talking about software upgrades. So it could be it's just a case of, I think this happened with the HIMARS when we were hearing about HIMARS missiles, their standard missiles that were being jammed at some point nearer the beginning, and it took some software upgrades, and that could still be a vulnerability for them. It would be nice if that's the fix, rather than having to, you know, send them all the way back to the US for them to have some kind of more of the hardware issue resolved. And I don't know whether it is jamming and other issues. You've got to remember, these are effectively new bits of kit, although they're using old core elements. This is a new bit of kit, and you will have teething issues, and you go back. This is why you need to battle test these things, and this is the ultimate battle testing, right? So it's not really a surprise that they're not working optimally, since they have been rushed through. There was I shared with you some views on how quickly they're being rushed through compared to the procurement of other sorts of military equipment. So it has been a really quick expedition of that stuff. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite worked out yet, but fingers crossed it still can. Or it could be a case, as Colby hinted, that you use twice as many as you need to. So they just become twice as expensive, but you end up having the same effectiveness. It's not as efficient, but it's equally as effective. You're going to be able to only use half as many effectively as you would have done. Jonathan Starks here says, now that all the aid packages have passed, should they try the border bill again to call out the Republican bluff? That's interesting. I don't think the Republicans have any intention of doing any border bill, and they never really did. Some of the proper politicians who wanted to govern actually wanted to get things done, like Senator Langford, who was one of the architects of the bill, and he's voted the second most conservative senator. So this guy is a super conservative. He's not a Republican name only. He worked hard on that bill. I was actually really happy with where they got to, considering it was working with the Democrats over something as problematic as a border, and it was killed. So I don't think there's any chance of that being resurrected. because Trump needs that to campaign on. If you solve the border, if you put something really good in place, then basically Biden and the Senate, I guess, or Congress to a degree, but Biden gets the applause for that, and that's a bit of a win for them during election seasons, during campaign season. So you're just not going to see any solution to the border for political reasons. Trump wants to come in and then solve that himself and get all the congratulations for so doing. But yeah, anyway, that's my tuppence. And what I have one more again from Jonathan. Can Patriots shoot down ICBMs? And I'm assuming that is what the US is saving them for, but it is better to shoot down an ICBM or let it hit. Both are terrible options. My guess is they can shoot them down, but much closer to where they much closer to their kind of terminal phase, if you like. I believe the THAAD systems that we talked about earlier would have much greater range to take out the ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere. And what Colby was saying is that although THAAD is supposed to be, like, some people, he said, mistakenly think it's an upgrade to Patriot, like it's better than Patriot. It's just a different system that does different things, and its niche is very high traveling ballistic missiles. But when you've got the Russians using such a range of missiles, and some of their ballistic missiles are air launched anyway, so they're lower down than that, and then you have cruise missiles operating much lower, and a kind of in between as well. Even the Zircon aren't, and I talked about them previously, as he mentioned, don't fly particularly high. The THAAD just isn't the right piece of kit for that. That's for, like, your intercontinental ballistic missiles, huge long distance ones that go up into the atmosphere where there's much less air resistance and whatnot, and you've got a rotating Earth or whatever it is, and then they come down really quickly. That's what that would be for. And Patriot is just the much better system for the needs of the war in Ukraine at the moment. But I am no expert on that. But someone else saying, JNT Politico saying, I believe that they have a range of 400,000 feet, the PAC-3 missile. So obviously they do have the ability to fire up fairly decently into the air there. Says that it can intercept into the atmosphere. I would just presume that their range isn't quite as far as a THAAD, but again, I could be completely wrong there. Okay, I don't know if there are any other questions or anything. It's kind of ask me anything time. If there is a lack of questions, I haven't actually got anything sorted out as far as stimulus to talk about. So I will probably pull this towards the end now. I'm just seeing if there is anything that's just come out recently in my threads. As we all know, things are looking fairly dicey in certain areas of the front line. My question, as I keep posing, is whether Russia has the ability to really push for a major offensive, or whether these are much smaller operational gains in certain places, and they attack in these pulses rather than just an all-out front line set of gains. I think that is reflective of the challenges Russia has. I think Ukraine are on their knees, but Russia are also pretty exhausted now in terms of equipment and personnel. There are these claims, though, that they are building up equipment. There are some claims that there are some stocks of mechanized equipment being built up in the Terny and Torska area. There are claims that Chechens have sort of four brigades or something up in Belgorod region. There's all sorts of different claims going on, and I'm just trying to work out why the Russians would keep stuff behind when they're trying so hard to take certain areas at the moment, and the Ukrainians are on their knees. It would seem counterproductive for the Russians to go, oh, they're on their knees now, we'll just save these for a summer offensive, don't use them. And you've got the Russians, being sent in meat waves going, hey guys, we could do with some more equipment here, we're just breaking through, we're almost doing something here, and you're keeping stuff behind. So I don't know. And maybe they're just waiting to train up a whole load of troops that they have recruited. I don't know. I'm swinging around on the topic of whether the Russians really do have strength in depth, and I just don't think they do. But there you go. Thanks, Jonathan, by the way, and thanks for your questions. I'm sorry I may not be the best at answering them on the fly there, but thanks for your contributions here today, and thanks to all of you in the live chat. I'm just seeing there's anything else that needs to be talked about. Here's something that might be worth mentioning about the SAMP-T, something that I would normally add to my news piece tomorrow in the military aid package bit. But MBDA, so they also make the Storm Shadows, and the Scalpers, like the French version of Storm Shadow. MBDA is currently widely used by our armies, producing Scalp and Aster missiles. So the Aster missiles are the missiles used for the SAMP-T, which is the equivalent that the French and Italians use, supposedly the equivalent to the Patriot battery. We don't know how good they are at taking down ballistic missiles, although they have taken down ballistic missiles in the Red Sea on the French frigates, I think, that have used them. Anyway, of which you know that we are giving some to Ukraine, including with the urgency that is appropriate to definitively switch to war economy so that we can help Ukraine. That's coming from Sébastien Lecornu, the French defense minister or secretary. We'll return to that idea because I think that is insanely important in a second. MBDA's transition to the war economy for Aster missiles is an absolute priority. I've made announcements in which I have mobilized for the first time administrative police powers, which make it possible to prioritize a certain number of subcontractors where civil orders must now take a backseat to military orders. There are plans to open a second Aster missile production line in Italy. The new generation of the SAMP-T is a real technological breakthrough for the future. They need SAMP-T is the answer there. But what's fascinating here is the moving to a war economy. And these aren't just, well, they shouldn't just be like throwaway words here. This is meaningful stuff. And I was wondering, kind of, what does that mean that you say you move to a war economy? Is that just like nice rhetoric? But the fact that he's said here, I've made announcements in which I've mobilized for the first time administrative police powers, which make it possible to prioritize a certain number of subcontractors where civil orders must now take a backseat to military orders. That is the kind of war economy, the tangible effects of moving to a war economy is you must make this and you must make it now. And even though you're a civil contractor, don't give a damn, mate. You're making it because Ukraine need it, and we are in a war economy mode. And stuff like that is so important to give a reflection of what is really going on here. Now, I guess I'll close out with this. It's nothing I haven't told you over the last week. I've been saying this a number of times, but I will continue to say it because it's so freaking important. I think the people in the know, particularly in Europe, I think there is a sense in America, but in the US, but they're kind of a bit too afraid of escalation as well. So they've got on the one hand, you've got this is serious kind of World War III, Ukraine needs as much help as they can get. And on the other hand, but the more we help them, the more likely is that Russia's going to use nuclear missiles. That's a dilemma that the Americans have, or the US has. That's, you could argue, is what Olaf Scholz is going through as well. But people like Emmanuel Macron, and I think the UK as well, yeah, Rishi Sunak's not your strong international leader, but by what Grant Shapps is saying, and here's Sébastien Lecornu, both of these defense secretaries are saying we're on a war footing with our military industrial complex. That you only go onto war footing if you are effectively at war, if you feel you are at war. This is a reflection that the people in the know at the top in a number of countries, key countries around the world, recognize how freaking serious this is. And that we are, as I keep saying, we are actually in World War III. Now, Ukraine are the ones fighting on the battlefront, but we are fighting in terms of cyber attacks are happening into France. That cyber attacks are happening into the US at the moment, with water treatment plants attacked over the last couple of weeks. You have the UK having had over the last decade or so, couple of decades, people assassinated. Sergei Skripal attempted to be assassinated, and you had Litvinenko killed in London. So we know what Russia are capable of. And you're having cyber warfare, and we are having information warfare taking place in European elections, in American elections, in British elections. We can argue about Brexit in 2016, but even I don't know, they've probably given up on the UK general elections this year because, yeah, I don't know. But I think we are in a really serious, we're in dire straits globally in terms of at an inflection point where, you know, this goes one way or the other. Do we hand this as a victory to Russia and allow Russia to grow in power and influence around the world, considering they are kind of in bed with China? It's an uncomfortable relationship, but BRICS is growing in soft power. We hear that there are other countries that are looking to join. Serbia, which is on the doorstep of the EU, looking to join BRICS. You've got Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. You've got the Sahel region of Africa that have had, like, what is it, 9 coups or whatever in the last few years, and where we've heard that France are now pulling out of Niger, Chad, US pulling out of Chad, Niger, and other countries in the area. And in that power vacuum, unfortunately, the Russians are moving in a kind of neo-colonial way. This is this chess game that's going on. That is a war. We might not have British troops firing guns, and you might not have American troops firing guns, but this is war. We are fighting the information war here. And there's a cyber war, and there's the real war taking place, and we are providing weapons so that Ukraine wins. Like, I know it's a loaded term, but I wrote an article once that this is effectively a proxy war taking place, and I don't mean that as in a pejorative way. I just think that's literally what is going on. We are supplying everything but troops to the Ukrainians to fight against the Russians. Now, I think we could do a better job of doing that. And we, as Colby has said today, there's 2 years of not ordering certain things that should and could have been ordered but weren't. So I think there's been some huge missteps. But, you know, we are at war, and as each passing week goes, there seems to be more and more people recognizing that in the corridors of power. The difference is that no one on the streets recognizes. People are politically ignorant, and that's not a pejorative either. Like, they literally don't know what's going on. I watch an awful lot of political YouTube channels, you know, whether it be sort of Pod Save America or this or that, and you're like, right, I'm listening to people who are really politically engaged, and they give me loads of information that is really high level information about the voting habits and the demographics and the statistics and political ideas. But I'm in a small minority, as you guys are listening to me give this talk right now. We're all in a small minority of people who are actively politically and geopolitically engaged in what's going on in the world. But I can go out on the streets today, and I can go into my local shop, and I can guarantee that almost everyone there will not have the same knowledge about what's going on around the world as I do, and will certainly not be thinking that we're on a precipice, and that we're, you know, almost in or are in a state of war, right? And there's therefore a really big disparity between people in the corridors of power that have that knowledge and the general electorate. Now, on the one hand, you might not want to scare your electorate, but on the other hand, you want them to know how serious this is, so that when they come to vote in the next elections, that's part of their core of information and knowledge, so that they can vote as knowledgeably as possible. Otherwise, you end up voting for Marjorie Taylor Greene because, you know, you think that the US is just doing some conspiratorial bidding of whatever. Maybe the actually lizard people are controlling Congress. So I think there needs to be a better job done by our politicians to communicate to the general public how serious this stuff is now. I think you had Emmanuel Macron doing that however, a month ago, or whenever it was, when he sat down, spoke to those two reporters and had a half an hour of communicating stuff like this, right? This is serious. Russia are doing this. We're being attacked by cyber warfare. We need to provide as much weaponry as possible to Ukraine. And he's certainly got the rhetoric right. And that was brilliant, because he's like, I am communicating to you, the general audience, this excrement has hit the fan. Has our media in the UK done that? Now, the problem in the US is become a partisan issue. And that's the same to some degree around Europe. We're very lucky in the UK that actually both major parties are completely behind supporting Ukraine. And that has meant that this has not become a divisive issue, and we can just get on and support Ukraine as much as we can. Now, you can argue the UK, and being the fifth, now the sixth biggest economy in the world, could be doing a lot more than what we are doing in terms of as a percentage of our GDP. That's another discussion. But in terms of rhetoric and the claims that we often make, I mean, David Cameron, our foreign minister and previous former prime minister, said recently that we've given the most to Ukraine. He's just like, we're the number one, like, assisters of Ukraine. You're like, no, not sure that's actually true there, mate. But nonetheless, there's this feeling in UK politics of a united front in supporting Ukraine. That's really good. There are other nations where it's much more divisive. And that is a real challenge. But yeah, we definitely need to have everyone on board with believing that this is as serious as it really, really is, as far as I'm concerned. And I guess that's what this is all about, is me talking to you guys getting that sense of importance as well, and going and speaking to your family and friends. And this is our way of having an impact on the larger world. This is, sorry, I've just been streaming, all my videos are stream of consciousness. I might have some tabs, but I don't know what I'm going to say until it comes out of my head. It comes out of my mouth. I'm like, thankfully that made a little bit of sense. Right. So yeah, JMT Politico agreeing with those sentiments. Now, this is an interesting question from Aussie Mocker. Don't make me start my Aussie accent again. Some people gave me a right hard time about that. Other people are like, oh, it's pretty good accent. Do we seriously believe Putin would use nukes, even if Russia intentionally recognized territory? Russian internationally recognized territory, is not under any threat from any foreign nation. That's the $1 million question, right? Will Putin seriously ever entertain using nukes? On the one hand, I don't think so. And there should be enough people around him to be able to keep him in check personally. It's not like he's got one button and can just press it, right? It's a lot more difficult than that. I also think he's full of bluster, and he likes to nuclear saber rattle. But whenever he's been pushed, he backs down or doesn't say anything. We've heard so often, "Oh, you're giving ATACMS, are you? Well, you're going to regret that," and then they promptly don't do anything differently. At the moment, Russia are operating at the max they can, right? So they have nowhere else to go, and all they have is more rhetoric. But they can't do any more than they are doing now, because they would be doing it. As I keep saying, all you guys will have heard me say it a million times. They would if they could. They aren't, so they can't. Like, Russia aren't going to be doing a half-assed effort at trying to win this war. I think they are, in terms of they're just not very well prepared for it, and they didn't plan for a war. They planned for a special military operation that accidentally became a war because they didn't have the right intelligence and idea about what Ukraine was and how that they would come across so much resistance to their objectives. But once they're in a war, they were then in a situation where they hadn't planned for a war. So then they had to turn it into a war and then sort out all the logistics, and they didn't have the military production in place. So that's been happening on the fly over a couple of years, and they're just really not in a position to successfully prosecute this war. And as a result, they are going to be trying as hard as they can to make this work, because otherwise it fails, right? So when they give these threats to the US or even to Ukraine, they too much gesticulation. They they really don't have anything to fall back on. Oh, you do that, we're gonna pay you back in kind. It's like, yeah, okay, what are you gonna do? Send some more infantry fighting vehicles into Krasnohorivka? It appears that they are firing their cruise and ballistic missiles at the rate that they are using, that they are making them, and we get that sense, but because they're not using them every night, right? You would if you could. You answer, you can't. Like, they have the targets, they fire them every couple of weeks because they have to make them and then get them to the places and then fire them. So there is, I think, definitely that issue there. And also they need to keep a strategic reserve, so they can't fire all of them, because if they go into another conflict with another nation, they need strategic reserves to fight another war. So they can't literally empty their stockpiles. Now, that means that what all they can do is ramp up industrial capacity inside their country, which they're desperately trying to do. There's a labor shortage that is leaving them in the lurch there, and they are being sanctioned. And all this means that they can't ramp up as much as they would like to. Meanwhile, the rest of the world can ramp up, but we don't always have the political will to do so. Although we're now getting onto a war footing, Russia already on a war footing. So this is just about industrial capacity against industrial capacity. Will they eventually use a nuke? I don't think so. But the only but to that is that and I've said this before, is the Putin paradox. The better Ukraine do, the more likely is that Putin will do something a bit nuts. I genuinely think Putin is not healthy. But I think he has some ailments. I think he's almost certainly got some form of cancer. Don't know what it is, but he has seen cancer specialists in Israel previously. And I think he's probably got Parkinson's or a similar, and his face is bloated due to steroids and blah, blah, blah. I don't think he's got an awful lot of time left. I think he was very afraid of COVID because of his pre-existing illnesses, which is why he didn't come out for 2 years, basically. Sat in his palace. I had people go through these tunnels that were sprayed, and they had to quarantine for a bit before they spoke to him. That's why he has those long tables where he speaks to people at the other end. And then you have the weird Putin who goes and hugs people and kisses them, and you're like, that's a body double. So this is one of the evidences that there's a body double. Not only is there slight differences in appearance, but there are differences in behavior between these people. And anyway, the point of saying all that is, for a person in that position, he is much less likely to be concerned about his own life. So he's concerned about his legacy, and he doesn't see this as a new iteration of the Soviet Union. He is Peter the Great again, or he is another Peter the Great, and that's how he sees himself, and he wants this to be his legacy. He's got all the material wealth. He's the richest human being on earth, by all accounts. He has 11 super yachts, however many palaces he's got all around the place. He can never experience those. He literally doesn't have the time to experience all those things. So he has no material needs, but no ability to experience those material needs, because he's ruling as effectively the new Tsar, a kind of dictator in the Kremlin. And as we know with dictators, when you stop being a dictator, you either end up in prison, a gulag, or dead. So there's no kind of retiring into those palaces without thinking you're going to be done by some kind of new regime that comes along. So he has to stay in power, which means that he's got all the material wealth but can't use it. So he's not going to be wanting more material stuff. He has a certain amount of time left, and all of that will probably be with him being in power. And that will color the decisions he makes. So the decision he makes will be seen entirely in that context. And that, I think, might send the arrow the other way, maybe, in terms of more likely to use nukes, as in, what's he got to lose? He's only ever going to be living for a couple of years as a dictator, and he wants to be left. He wants to leave this world with the understanding that everyone in Russia thinks he's awesome, and he is a new Peter the Great. And so, does he leave Russia in the doldrums, absolutely hammered by a war that was pointless, and resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of Russians, either dead or injured, and with the country in complete economic freefall. How does he avert that? Well, one option might be to use nukes, right? I'm torn over nukes. I don't think on balance he is likely to, but you can paint a picture of him whereby I think you can see him do it as well. So anyway, that's just everything in my head just spilling out there to you guys. I'm sorry if it doesn't make much sense, or I don't know whether it's justified or not. Let me know what you think. Anyway, I'll just pop in back into the live chat now, as I've just been wandering, running around, actually, sprinting around the corridors of my brain and bumping into neurons and expunging my thoughts onto the world. Right. Okay. So that's probably enough for me anyway. Ozzy Mocker's like, Jesus, mate, I wasn't expecting. It was just one little question. Pack it in, wind it up, wind your neck in. Right, thank you everyone, really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for the very kind people who have supported the channel. Kevin Forst for gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics membership. That allows me to keep the lights on. Thank you so much, mate, really do appreciate that. Tom Williamson, who's a ledge, go and check out my flag live chat with him. I think it was on my A Tippling Philosopher channel. He's a fellow skeptic, good lad. And Johnny Christensen, thanks, mate. Really appreciate your Danish support. Thanks to Julian Rossiter again for his great question. Really appreciate that. In the meantime, guys, take care of yourselves. And of course, Toodle Pips, keep banging the drum for accuracy, truth, and keep Ukraine in people's consciousnesses, and make sure they have an accurate understanding of what is going on in Ukraine. So you guys need to correct people in the most effective way possible, nicest way. Often it's not about arguing straight up with people. It's something called a backfire effect, where the more you give rational evidence against someone's position, the more they entrench in their original position. So think very psychologically about each individual that you are talking to, about how best to, you don't want to crash up against them. You're more likely to have more joy if you just nudge them a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. How can you best influence people towards a correct moral and political understanding of what's going on in Ukraine for the benefit of the world, your children, and Ukrainians on the front line and in the cities and towns and villages of that proud nation? Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care. See you later.